Okay, 8.4. We're looking at rational or fractional expressions. So we're still kind of going back to hopefully remembering what we did back before fall break. So here's the big thing when we're doing these. One of the big things they're going to throw at you for this part is where we're talking about excluded values. And if you've forgotten, then we'll go back and remind you here. That when I talk about excluded values, that's going to occur when your denominator equals 0. So we're going to get the first few questions are going to be just that. We're going to be asking you, okay, tell me where this thing has excluded values. And then after that, we're going to start working up to where we're going to start adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing in the next few sections. Okay, here we go. So the first few examples, we're going to do just that, where we're just going to state the excluded values, and then the next later part of section 8.4, we're going to add in a little bit more to that. Okay, the first example, we'll do f of x is 4 over 3x minus 5. And again, all we're going to do is we're going to take whatever that denominator is and set that part equal to 0. So we're going to take 3x minus 5, set equal to 0. So for that one, we'll add 5 to both sides. And then divide by 3, so x would equal 5/3. Okay, now where it gets a little bit tougher when we're going through these is if you've got just a simple little fraction like that one was, not that big a problem. Where they're going to make you go back and start kind of refreshing what we did back in the earlier parts of Chapter 8 and even Chapter 7 and Chapter 6 and everything else is that you're going to have a fraction that's going to have a little bit more complicated denominator. And it might even get where you've got two parts. So still the same directions for this one. We're still going to state the exclude values. So we're still going to do the same thing. We're going to exclude all the denominators equal to 0. So if you have two denominators, you've got two different things you have to set equal to 0. And if you thought we were done with factoring, well, we're still not done with factoring yet, because for this one, guess what we have to do on the first denominator that's here? You got to factor. Now the good news is for this one is that it's factoring positive 24 and looking for the pair where the sum is going to equal positive 10. And the good thing on that one is it's all positive, so we don't have to worry about changing any signs or positive, negative. We're just looking for the pairs that add up to 10. And we should get it's going to be 4 and 6. And then setting each of those equal to 0. Pretty easy to solve for those. Just change the signs. So subtract 4 from both sides. Subtract 6 from both sides. And for the other one over here, just add 3 to both sides. Okay, so the other problem up here we had one number we had to exclude this one because the denominators, we had two denominators, and this one was a little bit more complicated. So now we've got to exclude three different values. So depending on the denominators, you might have to exclude one value. Sometimes it's two, sometimes it's three. You know, they can even make it more complicated that you might have, you know, four different numbers you're going to exclude. So you just take the fractions that you've got, take the denominator, set it equal to 0, and just figure out what those numbers are going to be. So even though we're kind of doing something a little bit new, it's really not anything new because you're still just solving it. But in this case, you're just solving all the denominators equal to 0. But instead of saying that's the solutions, now we're saying that's the numbers we're going to exclude. Again, why we're excluding those is if you plug those numbers in up here, that would be something over 0. And if that's over 0, that makes it undefined. And if it's undefined, then we can't have those. Okay, so for the second set of problems, what they're going to do is it's going to still be the same type thing, but they're going to add just a little bit more to it. Okay, so one other little bit of something we're going to add to this one. We're still going to state the excluded values, but now after we do that, we're going to simplify. And when they do the simplifying, that means you have to factor and cancel. So first part, still the exact same thing. You're going to set the denominator equal to 0. And the good thing is once you've done that, if you had to do any factoring, that's still going to kind of lead you right into the simplifying part of it. Okay, so for this one, here we go. We'll do x squared plus 2x minus 8 on top, and x squared minus 5x plus 6 on the bottom. Again, you still, basically it's a two-part equation. So the very first thing we want to do is we're going to state the excluded values. That's almost part A. And then part B, we'll go back and simplify. So for this one, we're going to exclude whatever that denominator is on the bottom, set equal to 0. Okay, so it's the factors of positive 6 where the sum is going to equal negative 5. Now for that one, you've got to be a little bit careful because depending on the signs, there's two ways you can get 5 if you're using the factors of 6. Because if it's 1 and 6, if you do 6 minus 1, that would be 5. If you do 2 plus 3, that would be 5. So you've got to be a little bit careful when you're going through these. So it's the positive 6. So only two choices. It's 1 and 6 or it's 2 and 3. So this is kind of a good one to go back and refresh your factoring here. Since that's a negative 5, again, the bigger number has to be negative. And then we're going to divide those two. If we do positive 6 divided by negative 6, that means the small number has to be a negative. Because the positive divided by negative is negative, so both of them have to be negative. So the pair together, that would have to be negative 5. That's going to be the negative 2 and the negative 3. So we've got x minus 2 and x minus 3 equal to 0. And then solving those, just change the sign. So x would equal positive 2 and x would equal positive 3. And again, that's our excluded value. Now, the only other thing they asked us to do after that was, basically that was part A. So we've stated the excluded value, so we've got this part done. Now we're going to go to the simplifying part. And again, when they ask you to simplify, that means you got to factor and cancel. The good news is you've already factored off the bottom, because right here we know that when we did this, it was x minus 2 and x minus 3. So really all you have to wind up doing is you've got to factor the numerator now. So we've got x squared plus 2x minus 8. For that one, if we factor the numerator, well, the factors of negative 8, where the sum would equal positive 2. It's got to be 2 and 4, right? We know it's not going to be 1 and 8, because that's going to either get you 7 or 9. Since it's a negative 8, since the bigger number is positive, negative 8 divided by positive 4 means that would have to be a negative 2. So this one would be x minus 2 and x plus 4. Okay, so there's excluded values. Now when we simplify, again, it's almost like part A and part B. We're going to take what we've got here and write it out in factored form. That was x minus 2 and x minus 3. So you can almost put a dash in between them, because that's like basically a part A answer. And then the B part is, now we're going to factor everything out. You've got x minus 2, so you can cancel those out. So when you simplify it, your final answer would be x plus 4 over x minus 3. Alright, do one more of those, and then we're going to do the same kind of thing, but it's got just one little twist different to it. Okay, so for example 2, we'll go x squared minus 3x minus 10. And that's over x squared plus 8x plus 12. Okay, and same thing on this. The very first thing said that state the excluded value. So before we do anything at all, we're going to go back and just take the original denominator that we've got and set that part equal to 0. Okay, again, we're going to do the factors of 12, where the sum's going to equal positive 8. The good thing is they're all positive signs, so when you go through these, it's not going to be 1 and 12, but it would be 2 and 6. So that'll be x plus 2 and x plus 6 equal to 0. And just setting both of those equal to 0. Just going to change the sign. So x equals negative 2 and x equals negative 6. Okay, so the excluded values part should go pretty quick, because you're just going to take whatever the denominator is, factor it, and then set both of those equal to 0. And the solving shouldn't be bad. Most of the time you may have to add or subtract a number. If you do bottoms up, you might have to go back and divide by something. But for the most part, I think most of these, they'll sneak in one where we've got to do a little bit of the bottoms up, kind of go back and factor that one. But most of the problems in there should be that you're just going to be doing just the easier one, where the first term is going to be just x squared. Okay, so we got the excluded value. So for the simplify part, Well, denominator we've got it factored as x plus 2 and x plus 6. So now we just got to factor the numerators. So we factor the numerator. We're looking for the factors of negative 10. It would be negative 3. And again, you only have two choices. It's either 1 and 10 or 2 and 5. Well, it's not going to be 1 and 10. So it's got to be 2 and 5. And since the middle term is negative, the bigger number's got to be negative. If you do a negative divided by negative, that means the other one's got to be a positive. So those two factors were x minus 5 and x plus 2. And again, just cancel out what you have in common. Okay, the only thing they're going to do different is, it's still going to be the same setup, but it's going to be division problems. And here's what you're going to do. You're going to rewrite the problem as a multiplication problem. And I think we've purposely kind of done this to avoid the problem here, but this part, they shouldn't ask you for excluded values or restrictions, but if they ask for excluded values, and I think on this part of it, they're not going to ask you about the excluded values or what sometimes they call them restrictions. They kind of go back and forth in Section 8.4. But if they talk about the excluded values or restrictions, we're going to only say it's in the original denominator equal to 0. But I think in this one, because sometimes there's some confusion because they have talked about it, and where after you rewrite it, sometimes they'll talk about it. So I think in this case, we're kind of purposely picked problems that we're not going to worry about the excluded values. That they're just going to ask you to simplify it and go from there. Okay, so for this one, let's go with x minus 2 over 4 and divide that by x squared plus 3x minus 10 over 6. Okay, so for this one, we're not going to do anything with excluded values. We're just going to simplify. So the very first thing is, just like we've done in the past with a lot of the problems, you're going to do keep change flip on this thing. So we're going to do x minus 2 over 4, change that to division and multiplication, and then flip that upside down so it's 6 over x squared plus 3x minus 10. There you go, KCF or KFC. And from there, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to factor everything that you can. The x minus 2 over 4, you cannot simplify that one. The only thing you can factor is this part now with x squared plus 3x minus 10. And again, you have two choices for 10. It's either 1 and 10 or 5 and 2. The only way you're going to get 3 is it's going to have to be 5 and 2. And since the bigger number is positive, so that means, or since the b term is positive, the bigger number's got to be positive. If you do a negative 10 divided by a positive 5, it's going to make that a negative 2. Okay, and you can also think about that x minus 2 being in parentheses. So if you put it all together, we've got 6 times x minus 2, and that's over 4 times x plus 5, and x minus 2. Okay, x minus 2 is canceled. Now here's one part you've got to be a little bit careful of when you're doing this one. Is you've got 6 over 4 times x plus 5 left over, that if you have the 6 and 4, you can do that part and just simplify the 6 over 4. So you can divide them both by 2. So if you divide both of these parts by 2, 2 will go into 6 3 times, 2 will go into 4 2 times. So on the top part, we've got 3 times 1, which would just be 3. On the bottom, you've got the 2. And we've also got the x plus 5. Okay, so the only difference is from multiplication division is you have to do a little keep change flip. After you do that, everything else is exactly the same. You factor everything else as much as you can. You factor out what you have in common, and just be careful. Sometimes those numbers kind of sneak in on you. But if you can simplify the numbers, you can simplify the numbers there. Okay, and the only other ones that you've got for these that you're going to have is, I'll show you one here where it's a little bit, two things. One where you got a little bit of a trick question. But for this part, I'm going to go ahead and give it to you where it's in factored form. It's got a little bit of trick question to it, so let me make sure we'll kind of get this one. Okay, so go ahead and kind of give this one to you where it's already factored out, because the main thing on this one is I want you kind of to see this one part, because sometimes if you haven't seen this in a little while, it's easy to kind of forget this one. That if you have it written like this, is there anything in there that's exactly the same in the parentheses? I mean, if we put, we put parentheses here, right? Now this one's x minus 2, this one's 2 minus x. Are those exactly the same? Because we got the right numbers but the wrong signs, right? Yeah. So remember, if you have the right numbers but the wrong signs, this is where you can rewrite 2 minus x. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to basically factor out a negative 1. So you can factor out a negative 1 and make that negative 2 plus x. and then you can just rearrange it so you can make it -1 times, put the x first and the -2 second. And that was one thing. I know we looked at that. It's been a little while back that we looked at that, so I just want to kind of remind you that if you do these problems, if you're working through some of these, and you get to the end and you've got the right numbers but the signs are wrong, just remember you can either take this one or this one and factor a -1 out. And if you do that, then you can make it so it's the right way. So if we had this problem, it would really be -1 times x minus 2 times 1 over x plus 5 and x minus 2. Okay, so now you can cancel the x minus 2's. You're left with -1 times 1, which would be a -1 on the top. On the bottom, you've got 1 times x plus 5, which would just be x plus 5. Okay, so again, not a big thing, but just something to look out for, that if you have the right numbers but the signs are wrong, then you can go back and rewrite one of the two parentheses you've got there to kind of make it work out that way. Okay, and the last couple of things here. Still the same thing. Yep, 2 more examples. So we're going to simplify and state the excluded values. This one's going to look a little different. Okay, so this one, again, we're still going to simplify, still going to state the excluded values. Now again, sometimes instead of excluded values, they'll say restrictions, so if you see either one of those two things, it still means the same thing. So let's get the excluded values out of the way first. You're going to exclude -6 times x squared times y to the 5th equals 0. Alright, and this one's a little different because we don't have any pluses or minuses. It's all one thing multiplied together. That there's no way you can factor this one. There's no factors, there's no x plus or x minus anything. So this one, it doesn't factor. So if you get one like this where it's just all multiplied together, all you're going to do is you're going to exclude either variable equal to 0. So just take x equal to 0 and then take y equal to 0. That's it. So if they ask you to exclude something like this, whatever you have in the denominator at the beginning, you just exclude those letters equal to 0, those variables. So this one's even easier than the other one we did before when we had the excluded values part. Alright, simplify part. And basically, here's where you break it up and do it one piece at a time. So we're going to do 24 divided by -6. So basically, we're going to do this thing into parts. So we're going to do 24 divided by -6. Then we're going to do just the x's. We're going to do x to the 3rd divided by x squared. And then we're going to do just the y. So if they give you this where it's all multiplied together, crammed together, then just realize you can break it apart. You can do just the numbers, just the variables, one variable at a time, so we'll do just the x's and then we'll do just the y's. So if you had to simplify 24 over negative 6, 6 will go into 24, right? So really that would be negative 4 over 1. Or you could just say negative 4, but we'll leave it in fraction form because it's there. And remember, with the exponents, that's where you're going to subtract the exponent. So what is 3 minus 2? There you go, it's 1. Thank you. So we're going to do x to the first. Now, the big thing on this one is, remember that if the bigger number is on top, whatever you subtract these numbers, that exponent has to go wherever that bigger exponent is. So if the bigger number is in the numerator, the leftovers have to go in the numerator. So that x to the first is going to be on top. On these two, if you subtract 5 and 2, 5 minus 2 is 3, right? But since the bigger power is in the denominator, your leftovers have to go in the denominator. So on the exponents, subtract the exponents, and wherever, just, 3 minus 2 is 1. 5 minus 2 is 3. Wherever the bigger power is, that's where that part has to go. So for this one, we put it all back together. We've got negative 4 times x to the first, or just x on the top. On the bottom, we've got 1 times y to the third, which would just be y to the third. So negative 4x over y to the third would be our final answer. Let's get you one more of those, and then we'll be done. Okay, so for this one, we'll go 12x to the fifth y, then 18x squared y to the fourth. Okay, and again, excluded values on these should be really easy because if it's all crammed together, you just take whatever variables you have, in this case x and y, and say we're going to exclude x equals 0, and we're going to exclude y equals 0. So again, you just take whatever's in the denominator and set any of those variables equal to 0. And when you simplify it, just do it, one piece at a time. We'll take just the numbers. We're going to do 12 divided by 18. You can divide them by 2. You can divide them by 3. But if you go all the way out, you can divide them by 6. If you divide these by 6, that'll make that 2 over 3. Okay, for the x's, just subtract the exponents. 5 minus 2 is 3. And again, the bigger power is in the top, so your leftovers would have to be in the top. And for the last one there with the y's, you've got y over y to the fourth. And again, here's the one thing to be careful of with that one is if you have the letter, there's got to be one of them there. So it's really y to the first over y to the fourth. Subtract 4 and 1, that's 3. Bigger exponents on the bottom, so the leftovers are going to be in the bottom. So then we just put it all together. You've got a 2x to the third on the top. On the bottom, we've got a 3y to the third. And that would be the final answer we're looking for right there. Okay, so again, those are just a little bit different, but still something you may have to kind of look at.